We're raised to believe that traps have iron bars and heavy doors, but the most dangerous trap on Earth has neither. It's invisible. It doesn't target the lazy or the reckless. It specifically hunts the most disciplined, the most loyal, and the hardest workers among us. You've been told your entire life that hard work is the key. But if you've been holding that key for decades, and you're still standing in the cold, ask yourself, why has it never opened a single door? Maybe because it's not a key, it's a weight. Most people look for a collapse, a single, dramatic moment where everything falls apart. But the system does not work through sudden impact. It works through erosion. Failure is loud, but erosion is silent. Failure is an event, but erosion is a process. It is the slow, polite, and almost invisible theft of a life, happening one Tuesday at a time. Observe the man who wakes before the sun. He is not driven by a vision or a hunger for what the day might bring. He moves because the habit has finally outlived the man. He gives his finest hours to a schedule he did not write, not out of passion, but because he no longer remembers how to do anything else. This is not ambition. It is momentum without a destination. Consider the woman who lets the opportunity pass. She tells herself it isn't the right time. She waits for a certainty that does not exist, for a signal that the path is finally safe. But in this mechanism, the right time is a ghost. It is the polite excuse used to stay small while waiting for a permission that was never intended to be granted. And look at the young who learn the most dangerous lesson of all, that curiosity is a liability. They are taught that a question is not a search for truth, but a sign of attitude. They learn to trade their why for a yes, until the why eventually disappears entirely. There is no judgment here, only observation, because this is how the structure maintains itself. It doesn't ask you to fail, it simply waits for you to wear away. The tragedy is not that people struggle, it is that they struggle in the wrong direction and call it discipline. And once the direction is lost, the next phase begins. Effort was made sacred long before it was made useful. We are taught from childhood that hard work is a virtue in itself, regardless of where that work is actually going. But we must ask, who truly profits when hard work is sold as a moral duty? It is rarely the one doing the work. The system rewards the worker with a sense of worth, a fleeting feeling of being a good person, while it quietly collects the actual value of those surrendered hours. There is a subtle, lethal confusion between two ideas, discipline and obedience. From the outside, they look identical. Both involve sweat, focus, and early mornings. Both require the suppression of immediate desire. But the difference is found in the compass. Discipline is the control of oneself to reach one's own horizon. Obedience is the control of oneself to maintain the horizon of the system. Machiavelli understood this mechanism of self-imprisonment perfectly. He observed that rulers never needed iron chains when they could convince men to chain themselves with promises of virtue. If you can be convinced that your exhaustion is a badge of honor, you will never look for the exit. You will stay, not because you are forced, but because you are proud of how much you can endure. You become your own jailer, guarding a cell that has no locks. Yet, in every system, there is an anomaly. There is always someone who started at the same point, under the same conditions, but chose to ask a different set of questions. What does the one who escapes actually look like? They do not look like a rebel. They do not shout or carry signs. In fact, they are often the quietest people in the room. While everyone else is competing to show how busy they are, the escapee is measuring results. They have replaced the question, "How can I work harder?" with, "What is this work actually building?" They are not loyal to the structure. They are loyal to the objective. They do not seek the approval of the system because they have already found their own direction. To the world, they might look ungrateful or detached, but in reality, they are simply the only ones who are truly awake. They have realized that the most expensive thing a person can own is their own time, and they are no longer willing to sell it for the hollow praise of being reliable. They are moving, while everyone else is merely repeating. Before moving deeper into the mechanism, it is necessary to stop, to look not at the system, but at the reflection in the glass. Most people do not realize they are being consumed until the process is nearly complete. They do not feel the theft because the thief is polite. There are signs, markers left by the process of erosion. They are quiet, easily ignored, and often mistaken for the weight of maturity. The first sign is the vanishing of the why. The rituals of the day are performed with precision, but the original reason for doing them has been lost. The body moves, the hands work, but the mind is elsewhere, simply waiting for the sun to go down. This is not laziness. It is the soul protecting itself from a task that no longer has meaning. The second sign is the not yet trap. The persistent feeling that life is something that will happen later, after the next milestone, after the next raise, after the next year. You are not living. You are preparing to live, while the only currency that matters time is being spent on the preparation itself. The horizon stays the same distance away, no matter how fast you run. The final sign is the fatigue that sleep cannot fix. It is a heaviness that settles in the bones, a realization that the effort being given is producing nothing for the self, only stability for the structure. You wake up tired not because of what you did yesterday, but because of the repetitive void of what you have to do today. These signs are not failures. They are the evidence that the system is working exactly as intended. Erosion does not announce itself with a crash or a scream. It does not need to. It only needs time and your silence. The more essential you become to the foundation, the less permitted you are to reach for the roof. This is the paradox of the essential man. The system does not promote the people it truly depends on, it keeps them exactly where they are. This is the first layer of the escalation: reliability. We are taught that being indispensable is the ultimate goal. But look closer at the mechanics. In any structure, the glue is what holds the pieces together. It is vital. It is fundamental. But have you ever seen the glue get promoted to a different part of the machine? No. Glue is designed to stay between the layers, invisible and immobile, until it dries out and is eventually replaced. When they tell you that the department couldn't run without you, they aren't offering you a ladder. They are tightening the bolts on your cage. Reliability is not a career path. It is a life sentence of carrying others' weight. Then comes the second layer: loyalty. Institutions have mastered the art of rewarding loyalty symbolically rather than structurally. They offer ceremonies, anniversary pins, and titles that sound prestigious but carry no actual authority. These are the mirrors the system holds up to make the worker feel seen while it continues to consume their best years. Machiavelli understood that power only shares power when it is forced to. If the reward for your years of service can be hung on a wall or worn on a lapel, it isn't power. It is a receipt for a life that was spent, not invested. But why is it that even when the bars become visible, we find it impossible to walk away? The answer lies in a glitch in human psychology known as the escalation of commitment. The human mind is terrified of a sunk cost. We look back at the 5, 10, or 20 years already given to the structure, and the thought of leaving feels like an admission of failure. We tell ourselves that if we quit now, all those years will have been wasted. To justify the past, we double down on the future. We throw good years after bad ones, convinced that if we just stay a little longer, the system will finally prove that our sacrifice meant something. We aren't working for a reward anymore. We are working to prove to ourselves that we weren't wrong to stay. This is the moment the trap stops being something built by others and becomes something we maintain for ourselves. Finally, the escalation reaches its peak: security. This is where fear is repackaged as prudence. You no longer ask, "Where do I want to go?" You only ask, "What will I lose if I move?" By this stage, the system has encouraged you to build a life that is entirely dependent on its oxygen. Your status, your comfort, and your identity are all tied to the very thing that is hollowing you out. You call it being responsible. You call it protecting your family. But Machiavelli noted that the most effective way to keep a man in place is to give him just enough to lose, but never enough to leave. Prudence becomes the justification for paralysis. You stay silent because the cost of speaking is too high. You stay still because you have convinced yourself that the cage is actually a shield. The more they need you there, the less free you are to move. And the more you have invested, the more you will defend the very walls that keep you small. This is not an accident. This is the design. And as the years turn into decades, the math begins to change. The question is no longer about what you are earning, it is about what is left of you. Imagine a man sitting in silence on his final day of work. He isn't angry. Anger requires an energy he no longer possesses. Instead, he is doing arithmetic. He is counting. He counts the decades given away. He counts the thousands of mornings he woke up to an alarm he hated, and the thousands of evenings he returned home too exhausted to be the person he actually wanted to be. He looks back at the risks he avoided and the opportunities he postponed until next year, and he realizes that next year eventually became never. The most painful realization isn't that he failed, it's that he succeeded. He did exactly what was asked of him. He was the definition of a good employee, a reliable provider, and a loyal soldier. He followed the map perfectly. But as he stands at the end of the road, he sees that the map was designed to lead him into a circle. The system's definition of success was never meant to include his freedom. Freedom is a variable that breaks the equation. Longevity is celebrated by the structure because longevity is what stabilizes the hierarchy. The system needs people who stay. It needs people whose identities are so deeply woven into the fabric of the institution that they can no longer imagine existing outside of it. Those who stay the longest become the most instinctive defenders of the walls, not because the walls are good, but because their own sense of self is now made of the same stone. To admit the cage is a cage would be to admit that their life was a mistake. So, they call it a fortress. We see the truth of this in the open space observations. Scientists once watched subjects who had been kept in highly structured, confined environments for years. When the boundaries were finally removed, when the doors were opened to a vast, limitless field, the subjects did not run for the horizon. They didn't even move. They stayed huddled within the invisible perimeter of where the walls used to be. Their bodies were in an open space, but their minds were still in the box. They had been taught to fear the unknown more than they hated the confinement. The air was fresh. The path was clear and the world was wide, but they remained frozen. They had been successful at adapting to their cage for so long that they had lost the biological capacity for the open air. The decades were not invested in a future. They were simply spent to maintain a present that belonged to someone else. And as the man leaves the building for the last time, he realizes the most terrifying truth of all. The system didn't just take his time. It took his ability to want anything else. The cage had moved from the outside to the inside. Regret is not a flaw in the design. It is the design working with perfect efficiency. Most people believe the system fears the moment they realize they've been used. But the truth is more clinical. The system does not fear realization. It only fears the timing of it. Awareness is a variable of time. When it arrives early, it is dangerous. It creates friction, resistance, and eventually action. But when awareness is intentionally delayed, when it is allowed to surface only after the energy of youth has been harvested, it changes its nature entirely. It no longer produces rebellion, it produces explanation. A man who realizes he is trapped at 25 will break the bars. But a man who realizes he is trapped at 65 will simply explain why the bars were necessary. He will call it sacrifice. He will call it the reality of life. He will wrap his regret in the language of virtue to make the weight of his own wasted years feel like a choice. This is the ultimate safety mechanism of the structure. When clarity arrives without the capacity to act, it produces bitterness, not rebellion. And bitterness is harmless. Bitterness stays in its seat. Bitterness continues to follow the schedule because it no longer has the strength to imagine an alternative. The system does not need to keep a person blind forever. It only needs to keep them busy until the sight no longer matters. By the time the man sees the cage, he is too tired to leave it. And so, he stays. Not because he is forced, but because he has run out of time to be anything else. But there is a deeper tragedy that often goes unnoticed. The man who has spent 40 years in the machine does not leave with a warning. He leaves with a lesson. He looks at the young, the ones with fire still in their eyes and questions still on their tongues, and he begins to extinguish them. He doesn't do this out of spite. He does it out of a desperate need to protect the only truth he has left. To admit that the system is a trap would be to admit that his own life was a waste. And so, to stay sane, he becomes the system's most effective recruiter. He repeats the same sentences that kept him still. Be patient, wait your turn. This is just how the world works. He doesn't warn them about the cage. He teaches them how to decorate the bars. He calls it passing on wisdom, but it is actually the transfer of paralysis. This is the ultimate victory of the structure. It doesn't need to hire guards to keep people in line. It only needs to wait long enough for those inside to volunteer for the job. Machiavelli understood that the most secure prison is one where the inmates are convinced that the warden is their benefactor. When a man has sacrificed his entire life for a lie, he becomes the lie's most devoted protector. He will defend the structure instinctively, because his identity is now part of the architecture. The generational loop is not closed by force. It is closed by the quiet handoff of fear disguised as prudence. Every time you tell someone to play it safe within a system that only consumes, you aren't being helpful. You are building the next layer of the wall. The question is no longer about what happened to him. It is about what is happening through you. The trap is being handed down. Have you passed it to anyone yet? Everything in this world can be renamed, renegotiated, or reclaimed. Money can be earned back. Reputations can be rebuilt. Even power can be seized again after it is lost. But time is the only currency that power never returns. Once a year is surrendered to a system that does not know your name, it is gone forever. There are 3 final truths to carry with you. Do not confuse endurance with progress. Just because you have survived the wait does not mean you are moving toward the shore. Do not mistake stability for control. A bird in a cage is stable, but it does not own the sky. And understand this, systems that ask for your patience are rarely preparing to reward it. They are simply preparing to outlast you. They wait for your fire to become ash. If this reached you, if some part of you recognize this pattern, do not just move on. Write it below. Not because I need to see it, but because you need to say it out loud to make it real. Write, I see the trap, and I am done moving at someone else's pace.